So I struggled with this particular selection a little bit because normally when I preach, I don't know why, but I really like to preach about like verses or stories or something that like you don't hear very often. I think it makes me seem more profound, right? Because I'm talking about, like if I'm talking to you about something out of like a book you never like hear about, or a verse you forgot was in there, like I feel like maybe I feel smarter than if I'm talking to you about like Philippians 4:13 or something. So I tend to be, you're much more likely if I'm up here to hear something from like Habakkuk than you are like John 3:16. And the problem is those verses that are really familiar to us are very often really familiar for really good reasons, because they're really important. And this is one that you hear a lot, and it's something I thought about a great deal this week. And so this sermon is a little bit of a trip through my meandering thoughts on a verse that's fairly familiar to us in Micah. And so we're going to be in Micah 6. And while the verse is really familiar, where that book is in the Bible might not be for all of us. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to find that out there wherever it is you're watching from. As we get started. So the context of this, if you read Isaiah, Jeremiah, pretty much any of the prophets, they've got a really pretty familiar arc as far as the story goes. God's people aren't doing the right thing, and then God says, fighting with microphone part one, and then God says, you need to be doing the right thing. Here's all the stuff I've done for you to establish trust. Hey, you remember that time you were slaves and I brought you out of slavery? That was really cool. Maybe you should listen to me. If you don't, then I shall smite thee. And then, there's the list of what God expects. And so this is, we've already gotten through the part about, hey, here's what God has done for you. And we're getting into what God expects. So in Micah chapter 6, I'll start reading in verse 6. And for some reason, I've brought my Bible with the tiniest print of any of them that I own. I didn't really think that through. So anyway, we're going to, with what shall, this is me actually starting the read. So with what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. So I started thinking about that last verse, and you hear it all the time. If you're an Auburn fan, it's actually part of that university's creed, strangely. But you hear the verse all the time. But we don't think about that a lot. What does it look like? What does it look like to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly? And so I've spent some time over the last couple of weeks thinking about that. I do a lot of random thinking. I think of it as part of my prayer life, or like maybe I'm driving or I'm doing something that doesn't require a lot of my mental focus, and I just start to consider these things. There are some people that might call that prayer or meditation. I think it might be giving it too much thought. It's more me just randomly thinking about stuff as I go about my day. But here is where I'm at with this stuff. So I just want to start talking about what those three things I think mean, and kind of how that applies to us. So for the first part, to do justice. And all of these terms are really, really loaded, because you already think that you know what justice means, and you already think that you know what humility means, and you already think that you know what kindness means. And I would propose that the more I thought about it, the less I think I readily understood it. And so justice, here's what I think. Justice has it's two sides of one coin. So the first part is simple. You'll note that I did not say it's easy, but it is simple. And when we try to convince ourselves that it's complicated, it's probably our way of trying to reason our way out of having to do it. It's like, I didn't do the right thing because I just didn't understand. Yeah, you did. So the idea of like personal justice, some of it is this: like when you have the opportunity to do or not to do the right thing, what do? To treat somebody or not to treat somebody in a fair and equitable way. What do you do? So maybe in work or financially, if pushing that line a little bit, or maybe behaving dishonestly, could bring you some benefit, and it's really unlikely that it's ever going to come back to hurt you, what do? When maybe if you're honest, that other person that's not is going to get ahead. All right, do you feel the need you got to step out there? You got to take care of yourself? Maybe not. So the way I think about it is this, and this is, I select this story because I don't want you to think, hey, always do the right thing, that it'll always work out better for you. There are going to be some ways that has a real cost. Have you ever been pulled over for speeding? I have. So I got pulled over once by a Lee County deputy. One of the times I've been pulled over by a Lee County deputy. Then I was on a back road in Beulah, and I knew that would elicit laughter from Matthew. So the speed limit was 35. It's a stupid speed limit. Luke just got on to me for saying that. It was not, there's no reason for it to be 35. So in my mind, I said it was 45 because I knew better than the law enforcement agencies. And so because the speed limit was 45, I set my cruise control at 51. Problem is the math doesn't all work out, and I got pulled over. And the deputy asked me, do you travel, or do you drive on this road often? And I knew that was a potential way out for me. And so I did the only honorable thing, and I said, no, never. This is not true. And then immediately I said, ma'am, that wasn't true. I drive it probably on average 3 times a day. And in my head, what I thought was she would be so charmed by my honesty that I wouldn't get a ticket, and that God would honor my honesty, and that I wouldn't get a ticket. So I got a ticket. And so sometimes it could benefit you. And she was never going to be able to access how often I drive that road. I would have gotten away with it if that would have gotten me out of the ticket. And I didn't, I really thought that being honest would probably get me out of the ticket. But in those moments, right, where you have that, what the honest and the just thing to do is, but you also know that it may benefit you to do that other thing. Okay. So that's the personal justice. And like I said, that is not easy to do, right? It's never easy to act in your own disinterest, but it is simple. It's not complicated. It's not beyond our understanding. But there's also another side to justice. While I'm talking about, prophets and such, there's a verse in Isaiah that I've always loved, and it's in Isaiah 1. You don't have to turn there, but I'll just read it really quickly. It's 16 and 17, and the prophet tells God's people, wash yourselves, make yourselves clean, remove the evil from your deeds from before my eyes. Cease to do evil, learn to do good. All right, so that's that personal side of it, but there's another side to the coin, and then it says this: seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause. All right, so there's a part of justice, doing justice, that involves not me doing more right things in my own life, but also exporting justice, right? MLK understood that this applies to modern contemporary concepts when he quoted Amos in his I Have a Dream speech. When you hear him say, let justice roll down like waters, that's quoting one of the prophets of the Old Testament, this idea of exporting justice. And so when you see injustice happening, how willing are you, when it doesn't even technically involve you, to advocate for the people where injustice is injuring them, right? And look, there's an easy way out on this stuff, and I'm not bashing people that do this, because advancing conversations and all of this and supporting people this way is not bad. It's just not an easy way out, right? So when you see injustice happen, there's a real inclination to make a social media post about how I stand with so-and-so, and then like click send, like, oh, well, that's racism fixed, right? Like, well, you've done your part. All right. That's not a bad thing. The washing your hands of it is, but the making the post isn't a bad thing, right? You want to voice, you stand with somebody. See the events of dealing with Ahmaud Arbery out of Georgia, like you see that happening. You want to make a post about it. Look, fantastic. But maybe the question that interests me more is this: what if something along those lines, or injustice that isn't as sensational, right? About quality housing or about generational wealth or something like that. When you see injustice happening, not like somewhere you don't live with people you've never met, but in our communities. Say that. When you see it happening in our communities and it does not directly impact you, are you willing to stand with the people that are relatively powerless? Yeah. When you have more power or more justice than someone else does, and the course of their life is not going to benefit the course of your life, are you willing to stand with them? And not like stand with them, like hashtag stand with them. Physically, stand with them when it's inconvenient to your time, or maybe puts you in awkward positions personally. All right, like that kind of exporting justice, like that's a big deal. So there are two sides of that. So yeah, you want to be better in your own life. Awesome, like that's fantastic. But Isaiah 1's really, really clear. Like when you get done doing that, like cease to do evil, and then immediately, same sentence, start to correct oppression around you. All right? And anyway, so when I thought about justice, some of that stuff, those are the things that came to mind. So what is kindness? I think all of these are words like you think you know what it means, and maybe not. So kindness. Oh, he's just such a nice guy. And that's part of kindness, right? Like, don't be a turd. Granted, that is part of kindness. But like, kindness, I think, so if you've ever worked an invisible job, you kind of know what this is. And what I mean is like a job where you're like nobody's day depends on their interaction with you, right? So, I don't have a lot of power in my job, but like there are some people, whether it's a student's grade or something else, where like something that matters to them does in some way depend on me. But I've also worked jobs like been a janitor or like a cashier, where so take cashier, right? So the most my job can impact somebody else is if they picked my line and I am faster than that other line they could have gotten in, right? I'm not setting the prices of the stuff that's in the store. You get in my line, I'm not going to hey, pick my line, I'll give you those steaks half off, right? I'm scanning the barcode, I'm taking the money, that's all it is to it. And a lot of those jobs that seem invisible, we've figured out in the last month or two, they're actually what we call essential. But anyway, so when you're dealing with those people, if you've ever been one of those jobs, you understand that people treat you badly from time to time. And you have this weird, like, there's this strange kind of, interplay here where the busier you get and the harder you're working, the more angry the people are that are interacting with you. And so the more, like, on a day where there's no rush, I'm not stressed, I'm okay, but you know what? The customer that comes through my line, everything's good, whatever. But like, those folks that wait till the day before Thanksgiving to do their shopping and I can't see the back of the line, everybody's angry, and I've been standing there for 8 hours and I'm doing the best I can. All right, like those people there, how do you treat them? Or you call somebody if you ever have like a customer service problem, and you call somebody with the cable company or the cell phone company, or pretty much any company. That person on the other end of the line is what we call a person? No, it's funny the way that works out. And the way I think about it is this. The people who we interact with in ways that seem invisible are not themselves invisible. Are you treating those people with kindness? And also, we get out of this a little bit by underselling the power of our own words. And you know this intuitively, you just don't think of yourself as having this power. You have had days ruined, and you have had days made by simple statements that people made to you, right? Like you have had compliments that have turned the trajectory of your day around. And you have had insults that have done the opposite. Okay. Fun fact, your words have that same power over the people that you interact with, right? Like kindness matters a great deal. And I think sometimes we don't give ourselves quite as much credit. I don't know which word is better here. This is sometimes translated as kindness and sometimes as mercy. Okay. I could barely read it because the print's small, but it's kindness in this Bible. But there are some where it's mercy. And I'll just say that mercy is good. So it's probably something that we could model as well. Mercy is this. When you have every right to be angry or to inflict punishment on somebody. They have done wrong. They do owe you. Like you would be in the right to hold that standard. And you choose not to do that thing. Okay. Right? That's what mercy is. It's not, it's debts that are forgiven. It's, it's arguments that you get past because the person matters more than whatever you were arguing about, right? Like mercy is that kind of thing. You think of Joseph, his brothers sell him into slavery. That's a really bad thing to do to somebody. And if you're mad because your brother sold you into slavery, I don't feel comfortable telling you to chill out. It's not that big a deal. Like it is that big a deal. And then later on, his brother, he's done well for himself, and his brothers have to come begging him for food. Joseph would have been totally within his rights to say, not happening, Jack. None of his brothers were named Jack, but that's because I would have said, this is delicious. Not your food because you don't have any. I would have thought this is hilarious, but Joseph, babes in mercy, when you have the right to lord it over somebody, when you have the right and the power and you actively choose to do not that thing, that's mercy. All right? So, mercy is a good thing, and it has real cost to use because you have to kind of give up your right to be angry. You have to give up your right to be repaid. But it's also something to kind of model. So, humility. What does humility mean? So, most of the time when we think we're being humble, what we're actually being is false. So, think about it like this. If I put on my very best suit and go to work, it's like, oh man, Mr. Price, you look sharp. I'm like, what, this whole thing? I just worked because it was clean. That's not humility. That's what we call in the ethics business a lie. Right? That's like pretending that you are less than you. That's not humility. All right? So if I was worth, say, many, many millions of dollars, and I still drove my Honda, it's not a bad thing. That's not the definition of humility, though, right? The definition of humility would be this. Can I have that much money in my bank account and think of myself as of no higher value than someone who doesn't have a bank account, right? So humility is a little bit different. It's the ability to think and understand that the world and time are bigger than you are, right? We're limited in our scope of the way that we view things. You only get to see the world that you see. And so what your brain does is it tricks you into thinking that is, in fact, the world, when it's not. The world's much bigger than that. And you've experienced this before. Have you ever interacted with someone that you knew and you made a joke with them, and they're normally a joking kind of person, and they either were really short with you or maybe burst into tears and walked away, and you got the distinct impression that you didn't have a full understanding of what was going on here? There's a really apocryphal story. I choose to believe this is true. It's probably not. Someone asked President Nixon when he was president, do you think that the world is overpopulated? And he said, oh, absolutely. Everywhere I go, it's crowded. He's the president. Right, but the idea is that's not, you could be somewhere and it's crowds all around you because you're the president. Well, all right, in a cornfield in Iowa, still pretty sparsely populated. And so when you deal with this, you only get to see the world that you see. Okay. All right, but that doesn't mean that that's all there is to it, because the people that you interact with have way more going on than you realize. Okay. And if we could both embrace humility, I'm trying to explain this without looking like that guy that has like the strings on the storyboard behind him that's kind of gone nuts trying to explain a conspiracy to you. If we could grasp this, this is what it looks like. So if I walk into a situation or a room full of people that I know, and I expect them to have nothing going on except the things that I already know they have going on, and strangely, because I'm not that humble, I kind of expect them to understand things going on with me that they have no way of understanding. Okay. And so I hold them to a really high standard of what they expect from me and what I expect from them. What if we did this instead? Just went ahead and assumed that the people we're interacting with have a ton on their plate. Some of it involves me, some of it doesn't. And I'm not really that gifted to understand all of it ahead of time. And so maybe cut them some slack, you know? And if they do the same thing in return, it's like, think of how many like hurts could be avoided by just assuming that you don't know that much about everybody and you can't realistically expect them to know that much about you if you don't sit down and have the conversation. That idea of like, man, maybe I'm not the center of the world. You know, maybe it's bigger than what I realize it is. But the problem with it is like that's tough to do. You know, like you get in a hurry. You need, you know, you have certain expectations out of people. You need them to do what they told you to do. You have, and when it's not getting done, it's frustrating. Humility is hard to hold on to, but we are really, really kind of hardwired to assume that our world is the world. When that's what we call a lie. So what does God expect from us? To just read the verses, all right, so man, what does God expect of you? He expects that you do justice and love kindness and walk humbly. It turns out that takes about 4 seconds to read. But to really walk that out is really, really intricate. So those are my thoughts, such as they are. And let me just pray with you before we make a couple of notes to close it out. God, thank you for being a just God. And thank you for being a kind God. And thank you for being a merciful God.